And welcome to Parashat Bamidbar. We're entering our fourth episode in this podcast series. And let's take a step back and understand where we are in the cycle. Bereshit was all about the creation of the world and understanding the source of the children of Israel, the land of Israel, the source of the Torah, source of creation. Then we come to Shemot, which is basically forging the characteristics of the children of Israel and giving them their task, making this world a home for the divine. And then we come to Vayikra, which is a calling for the Jewish people to elevate themselves to a state of purity and retain that purity. And whilst to be immersed in the world, to be separated from that, to retain its purity, but still engage with the world in order to elevate it. And then we come to the Bamidbar, which is basically us going into the desert. The world is an illusion of a desert where the law of nature takes place. There's very little divine revelation there. And that is the task of the Jewish people, to bring out the divine out of the seemingly indifferent and antagonistic somewhat reality of the world to the presence of God. And that is our task. And we have to go into the desert and retain our purity in that environment and still be messengers of Hashem and reveal the glory of Hashem to the world. And in the stories of Bamidbar, we see the tension between our mission and the hostile environment that we're in. And it's in Bamidbar that we actually are assembled into an army, the structure of the army of Hashem, the locations of the tribes around the Mishkan, how they move, who goes first, who goes last. The whole structure will become an army, like a parade of Hashem's goodness. And anybody who's experienced life knows that life is full of challenges. And Bamidbar is a call to arms, calling us to summon up our greatest spiritual strength to bring the world back into a sanctity for the home of the divine. And here we have the third counting of the Jewish people. Remember that we were counted first when we left Egypt, and then after the Chet Egel, and now this is the third count. And the difference, notice the difference that Aaron and Moshe are supposed to be counting this third count, whereas after the Chet Egel, only Moshe was asked to count. And that was because of Aaron's involvement in the Chet Egel. But here he's completely absolved, and so he's included in the counting with Moshe. And this count is a great equalizer. It's a recognition that every single person matters, who they are, the genealogy of their family. It's very important in the Jewish eyes, is to trace back your genealogy back to your source. It's also a great equalizer because each person from the age of 20 to 60 was counted. They were all equal, and yet, and they all had their individual contributions to make, and yet they couldn't operate. We couldn't operate unless we were part of the entire nation, of Jewish nation of the army. Imagine you wouldn't be very good if you had to fight a war by yourself. It's only when you combine your strengths with your brothers and sisters that you can combine and create a force worthy of defending the nation. And so there's this balance between individual importance and uniqueness and the submission to the whole of the Jewish people, being part of that Jewish nation. So while we all have our individual contributions to make, we draw inspirations from those of our brothers and sisters. And it's interesting that the Torah mentioned that this is the first day of Iyar. This is exactly 1 year and 1 month since leaving Egypt. What is the significance of this date for the counting? And the Alshech quotes Rashi that says that the counting here is really a counting to confirm the number of Jews who became the Merkava, the seat holding the Shekhinah. What's fascinating is that this role was given to the Jewish people as they left Egypt and as they ascended to Mount Sinai. The the top of their spiritual ladder, but they lost it at Chet HaEgel, the golden calf, and Yom Kippur was forgiven. Then it took until the 1st of Nisan to build the tabernacle, to house Hashem, so to speak. And this is 1 month afterwards. So the Alshech said, if it was indeed the case that the counting was to count the number of Jews holding the Merkavah, then that should have been done the 1st of Nisan when the tabernacle was completed. But Hashem waited an extra month before counting them. And the Alshech says something fascinating, and that is that when we came to Mount Sinai and we were experiencing the prophecy of that closeness of God to God, we saw the arrangement of the angels up in heaven who were holding the Merkavah at the time. And they were split into 4 groups, 4 camps around the Shekhinah. And when the Jewish people saw that, they said to God, oh, we would love to emulate that down here in the world. Can you arrange for us to do that? And Hashem held that request, that prayer, in a holding zone until 1 month after the creation of the tabernacle. And it's at this point that Hashem gives the answer to the Jewish people to become like the angels were in 4 groups of 4 camps around the Merkavah. And so we're actually described, the 12 tribes are actually brought into 4 camps, but in order to retain the individuality of each tribe, even though there are 3 tribes per camp, the Torah says that each tribe has its own flag, and each flag the same color as the jewel on the ephod, on the breastplate of the Kohen HaGadol. And so they had their own identity, but they were very much part of the larger collective. So the counting was a reintroduction of the presence of Hashem, the Shekhinah of Hashem, in the camp of Israel. And the Alshech says something quite unbelievable. He says that before exiting Egypt, the angels were holding the Merkavah, the seat of Hashem, the Shekhinah. But that at this point, the Jewish people took over the role of holding the Merkavah instead of the angels, and the angels, incredibly, become the army of the Jewish people. I'm not quite sure what that means, that the angel becomes the army of the Jewish people. But I presume that, when we went to battle, it's the spiritual angels that came and defended us and protected us and acted as our army. But I'm not sure. In any case, it could be that explains how the tzaddikim, who have managed to raise and refine their being into the spiritual godliness of their soul, which is above the angels, are able to instruct angels to do things for them. We have examples of that with Yaakov, for example. This ability for a human being to climb up the ladder, the spiritual ladder, to the place above the angels was made possible by the fact that we learned in Bereshit that a man was made of all the elements of the universe. The earth was his body, the soul, the nefesh, part of his soul was from the heavens, the ruach part of his soul was from the sphere of the angels, and the neshama was from the galaxies above. And it's this ability that man has unique in creation to be able to climb up that spiritual ladder. And when he does so, he climbs above the angels, and then he takes over the role of the angels in terms of holding the Merkavah for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And this idea is hinted at in chapter 2, verse 32, when it says that he counted them according to their hosts, Letzevotam, according to their army, suggesting that the angels are their army. And it's very interesting that there are 3 levels of sanctity within the arrangement of the Bnei Israel in the desert. And you have the tabernacle in the center, surrounded by the Levites, and then surrounded by Bnei Israel. And this mirrors the fact that the Torah is held by Moshe and Aaron initially, and then the second tier is the princes of Israel, and then the third tier is the Bnei Israel. But what's fascinating to bear in mind is that the positioning of every tribe was equal distance from the tabernacle. They were equally distanced from the tabernacle. But there was, the Alshech suggests, some jealousy between the tribes as to their positioning and who goes first, who goes last. And this is resolved partially by the fact that each tribe had its own flag that it represented. And secondly, this jealousy was put to rest in the following manners. Firstly, please notice that in the description of the locations of the tribe, Torah would describe the leader of the tribe, and then it's whether it's north, south, east, or west. So, for example, verse 10, it says Reuben will be in the south. Verse 18, Ephraim will be in the west. Verse 25, it says Dan will be in the north. But with regards to the tribe of Judah, it reverses the order. It's verse 3, it says, those camping in front to the east will be the banner of the tribe of Judah. And why is the order of descriptions varying for Judah? So that he wouldn't think that he, being described as the first camp, you wouldn't think that he is the head of the whole of all the 12 tribes. In fact, the positioning of the tribes around the tabernacle was according to the order in which the sons of Yaakov accompanied him in the coffin to his resting place in Cave of Machpelah. And it's this order that was retained in the structure of the Jewish camp in the Midbar. And in order to balance the perception of the tribe of Dan was the very last tribe located in the north and the last tribe to move when the children of Israel moved, the Torah describes in verse 31 that as it concludes the whole thing, it describes that the total sum of the tribe of Dan was so and so. They set out last according to their banners. The Hebrew is ledaglehem, as if all the other banners are subdued to the banner of Dan, who's at the end of the procession. And finally, let's have a look at chapter 3, which talks about the genealogy of Aaron. And it's fascinating, this description of Nadav and Avihu. And there's several anomalies that I really want to bring to your attention, that the Alshech, in his sharp laser eyes, is able to pick out that it's hard to pick out otherwise. In verse 1 of chapter 3, it says, these are the descendants of Aaron and Moshe on the day that God spoke to Moshe on Mount Sinai. So the Alshech says, what do you mean? They're only the sons of Moshe and Aaron on the day in Mount Sinai and not afterwards? And then the other anomalies are really bizarre. Look at this. Chapter 3, verse 2 again. It says, and these are the names of Aaron's sons, and it gives the names. And verse 3, these are the names of Aaron's sons, yet again appointed as priests. Why the repetition? And notice that in verse 3 and verse 2, we're no longer calling them the sons of Moshe and Aaron. It's only the sons of Aaron. The Alshech really wraps this whole discussion about Nadav and Avihu. And firstly, he says, notice that in verse 4, it says that they died lifnei Hashem, in the presence of Hashem, to clarify the high nature of these souls that perished. But also notice that they had no children, and they brought unauthorized fire, and Eleazar and Tamar became priests only after they had passed away. So Nadav and Avihu were priests, and they did actually serve in the temple, albeit very, very short period of time. And the repetition of these are the names of Aaron is to give us unequivocally the idea that the children of Nadav and the children of Aaron, Nadav and Avihu, were purely his children, and do not think that because they erred and they died that there might have been some question about their genealogy and the fact that they were his sons. There was no question about it. They were definitely his sons. And why is it described as these are the children of Moshe and Aaron in verse 1, but later on it's just described as Aaron's children, because it comes to teach us, the Alshech says, that we have two types of children: our physical, biological children, and our spiritual students who we teach. And at the beginning, at Mount Sinai, when God spoke to Moshe at Mount Sinai, the Nadav and Avihu were equally the children of Moshe because they were disciples of Moshe, they were his students. But what happened was that it was described in Exodus 24, chapter 24, verse 1. It says that Nadav and Avihu were mentioned even before the elders. So it was Moshe, and then Aaron and Nadav and Avihu, and then the 70 elders. That's the order of holiness of those three groups. But yet, when Moshe ascended again in chapter 32, verse 4 of Exodus, only Moshe is described as ascending. In other words, at that stage, the children of Nadav and Avihu were no longer considered as disciples of Moshe because they no longer followed his footsteps. In what way? When Moshe went to the snare, to the burning bush, he diverted his eyes because of the holiness of the sight, of the divine sight that he was looking at, in his humility and his modesty. And yet when Nadav and Avihu experienced the divine revelation, they gazed upon the Shekhinah casually and ate and drank. And at that point, they no longer followed the footsteps of Moshe and no longer became his disciples, as it were. And the fact that they didn't have any children meant that Elazar and Itamar had to step in. But the most important thing is to notice that they were holy people and Hashem took them whilst he in his presence. So that's it for Parashat Bamidbar. I hope you enjoyed it, and leave you with this bracha that we will be blessed to understand and appreciate our unique contributions and our unique strengths to be able to contribute to the children of Israel, but realize that on its own we're nothing. We can only achieve our true mission as part of the collective. Shabbat Shalom. Speak to you next week.